Anyone at all? No. All right. So fungi is actually it's a kingdom, which is like the step lower than a domain, right? Domain. Remember, we have the 3 domains. So which domain is fungi in?
Eukaryotes.
Eukaryotes, right? Because they have organ-bound organelles, membrane-bound organelles, not organ-bound organelles. And so, so they're eukaryotic. That's the first thing, right? Another way to describe them is heterotrophic because fungi do not make their own food, right? So that's important to know. So they need to eat other things in order to survive. So what organelle would they be missing then? What organelle would they not have if they don't make their own food from the sunlight or
chloroplast?
They won't have chloroplast, right? So also in general, their color won't be green, right? Okay, and most are multicellular. They're considered multicellular organisms, except there are some exceptions, which are called yeasts, right? And you guys know what yeast is, right? It's like the thing that makes bread rise. But actually, in a larger classification, yeasts are, there's a bunch of different types of yeasts, and they are all single cell. They're like single-celled fungi. Okay, but most in general, we're getting to more complex organization, as we're going up in, through these different kingdoms. So fungi are like, in terms of like, in the grand scheme of things, they're starting to get more complex than bacteria and protists and stuff, right? Because most are multicellular as opposed to protists, which most are unicellular, but some are multicellular, right? All right, so again, take a look at these. These are all probably, you have some sort of like familiarity, I'm sure, with these, right? These here, these are yeasts, right? This is an example of yeast. So this, you see the single individual cells there, right? This is bread mold, right? Which I'm sure you guys are all very familiar with also. This is another type of fungus that grows on fruits, right? It's like a little fuzzy. This is called corn smut, and it's another type of fungus that infests corn plants, right? Does anyone know what this is? And
like a ringworm or something like that?
Yes. Do you know what? So ringworm is a type of fungus that infects the skin, right? And it's actually spread through like contact. A lot of times, like wrestlers, like when I was in high school, and there were these like mats in like the gym, like there was like, I don't know, like kind of like an urban legend, like don't touch the wrestling mats. Like during our phys ed class, we would go into that, like the lower gym and like use the equipment there. And like people would say like, don't like touch the mats because the wrestlers like all have ringworm or something. Cause they like, they press like closely on each other and then like it would like spread from wrestler to wrestler or something. So anyway, and it has this characteristic form of like a ring, right? And the name itself is like a misnomer because it's not a worm. It's actually a fungus, right? Do you guys know what this is showing? It's a toe, right?
Athlete's foot.
That's athlete's foot, right? Which is also another type of fungus. And then these are just mushrooms, right? You guys know that there's a wide variety of mushrooms. That some are poisonous, some are edible, right? So there's like also a really, really large variety. We could like spend a whole year talking about the classification of fungi because again, look, you can see how diverse they are. But there are the characteristics that unite them again. So we'll talk about those. And we're not going to get into the basics, like not in the basics, but like the nitty gritty of like what the names for each phylum of fungus are. That's just beyond the scope of this course. We're really just going to kind of talk about the general characteristics that unite this kingdom as a whole. All right. So roles, right? One of the major roles of fungi is they're decomposers, right? They take living matter and they help cycle it through through the ecosystem, right? Another major role that they have in biology and in biological relationships is symbiosis. We've talked a lot about different symbiosis. So remember the coral and the protists are symbionts, right? They live together and help each other. Just like the commensals on our skin, like the bacteria on our skin are like living in symbiosis with us. Pretty much like unless you're living in like a vacuum, you're living in some sort of symbiosis with something else, right? But actually, but yes, there are like a few that I want you to be really aware of in terms of like when we talk about fungi. Okay, parasites and disease. Obviously, since this is like a health like oriented school, we always talk about like what kind of human diseases or uses, I guess, that these plants, these like organisms can have. So fungi certainly do serve as parasites and cause disease. But then there are also ways that like biomedically we can use them and apply them, to our benefit, right? So human applications. So we'll go through each of these together, right? Let's talk about the structure, like the physical structure of fungi. So remember, we said this in the beginning that, earlier, we mentioned it earlier, but they have a cell wall and it's made of chitin, right? Do you guys remember what type of biomolecule chitin is? Anyone? Is it a protein? Is it a lipid? Is it anyone?
Isn't it a protein?
No.
Is it a carbohydrate?
Yes, thank you. It's a polysaccharide. It's a carbohydrate, right? And remember, so cellulose was one of them used for structural support in the plant cell wall. And then peptidoglycan was the polysaccharide that was used in the bacterial cell wall. And chitin was the third polysaccharide that we talked about that was used for structure in fungi cell walls and in insects and crustaceans like hard shells, right? So it's a very durable sort of polysaccharide. So good, it's a carbohydrate, right? So that's what their cell walls are made of, right? And then the cells, so if you see this little each little division, that's like a cell, right? And they're connected into these these long chains. You see this long chain of these cells, kind of it's like almost like a train, right? Like a so the cars of a train, right? And they're connected into these long filaments called hyphae, right? So this thing here, this long line here is called a hypha, right? Hyphae, plural, right? Are we good so far for that? That's pretty easy. So here's a hypha. Here's a hypha. Okay. And then some fungi have they're known as septate, right? Which means that they have a septum or a separation. Do you see the separations between the two cells here? So here's their cell wall on the outside, on the outside lining, but in between each cell, so where the two different cells connect to form the hypha, right? They have this wall that's called the septum, but that has a pore in between it to allow nutrients and stuff to flow freely between the two cells, right? So it's kind of like this door that helps this exchange between the two cells, right? But so some of the hyphae are connected, are divided like that. So those are called septate, right? But then other ones, instead of being divided, they're kind of one huge connected. So they're connected by pores, but in the other ones that are called aseptate, which means without septum, right? Or coenocytic, I think. Then do you see how there are no septa in between here? Right? So that's why they're called aseptate, right? So it's almost like this huge cell with tons of nuclei, but really, I mean, they are individual cells, but then they just never form that division between them, right? Which is kind of weird because it's this whole continuous soup of fungus, right? Of fungal cells, I guess. Okay. And then, so if you wanted to see more of a realistic picture, right? Here's a group of hyphae. Do you see the hyphae here, right? and they're actually formed into these like webs. So this whole web, it's like an underground network. The whole web itself is called a mycelium, or plural mycelia, right? The networks that they form are called mycelia, right? So this is one mycelium, let's say, and then maybe if there's like a whole network of hyphae somewhere else, that would be another mycelium. But yeah, so this is just their structure and how they look. So they usually have those long strings, and then they end up like branching out like this underground, right? Okay, but these are all, and if you were to zoom in, they would be all like little cells of fungus. Okay, how do they reproduce? So just like some protists, right? They can do both asexual or sexual reproduction, right? Meaning that they could either sort of just like kind of they could sort of like split in half, or they can also reproduce sexually, meaning that they produce gametes and then they, are fertilized. And then they usually reproduce via these little haploid particles called spores, which they pretty much like float out. They disperse them into the air, and then they go off and like land somewhere and then develop into, another fungus, sort of another hypha, and then mycelium, right? Okay, so this is just like their modes of reproduction. Pretty straightforward, yes? Okay, and then so their role as decomposers is really, really important to any ecosystem. I know like sometimes people are like, oh, like, when you have some sort of food in your fridge and then like you don't eat it for a while and then it gets all like moldy or like, fungus on it. It's kind of like gross. But that's what's important in nature, because then they will, they'll decompose that stuff and then reuse those materials to cycle it through the ecosystem again. So that's, it's an essential role. So organisms sorry, I'm looking for something. Fungus can be classified as saprophytes or saprotrophs, which means that they feed on decaying matter, right? That's like the definition. And what happens is like so when you guys eat food, what happens to you? Like, how do you do it? First, where does the food go?
Into your mouth.
Into your mouth, right? And then how do you start to break it down then?
Chewing in saliva.
So first, in your saliva, you have amylase, which is an enzyme that breaks down starch, amylose, right? And then it goes down into your stomach, and inside your stomach, you have all these other acids and like enzymes that further like break the food down, right? Inside your body. But for decomposers, it's like the opposite. So what they do is they release their enzymes, their stomach. That's like if we took if we had like a big steak or something and we like spit out all our stomach acid and all our like, saliva, and then we broke down the steak outside of our bodies and then like basically like rubbed it into our skin and absorbed the nutrients, like the broken down nutrients like that. That's like essentially what they do, right? So they release enzymes into the environment where they are. The enzymes then break down whatever food that, potential food things that they would want to eat, right? And then they absorb all the nutrients, and they digest the stuff, and then they absorb it into the stuff that they want into their bodies, right? So it's kind of opposite of what we do. What's really good is that they can digest things that other organisms cannot digest. So things like wood, right? That's like a very durable material. They can't, normal organisms, can't digest wood, but they can like, release stuff into the, in the environment and then dissolve the wood. So that's kind of interesting. And they can recycle carbon and other nutrients throughout the cycle. So that's really important. All right? Easy? Okay, and then the symbiotic relationships that I want you guys to be aware of. So the first one is called mycorrhizae. And if you look at them, basically it's like the relationship between a fungus and a plant, right? And it's really the plant's roots, right? So this is like a picture of it. And basically the fungi, they help absorb the nutrients from the soil that maybe the plant wouldn't otherwise have had access to, right? And what would the plant be doing for the fungus? So the fungus helps the plant absorb nutrients from its environment, and then essentially the fungus lives inside the plant's like roots and networks and stuff like that. So and then the plants also give the fungus food because the plants make food, right? Because they have photosynthetic like abilities, right? So it's a good, nice like give and take there between the plant roots and the fungus. So those are called mycorrhizae, right? So you should know which two organisms are, living together mutualistically in that relationship, okay? And then you guys have heard about this before, right? Lichen, we've talked about this before. Remember the lichen on the trees with those peppered moths? And remember how like during the Industrial Revolution, the lichen all died because of the like smog or the exhaust from like the factories and stuff, the emissions or whatever. So, and it all turned black. So lichen is basically, and you guys have all seen this before, right? On trees, like this kind of like green. It doesn't always look exactly like this, but it has like that greenish, like kind of like, it looks almost like, when copper or some metals get that like patina, that like greenish kind of coat. That's sort of like what the color is. But anyway, so this is lichen. Lichen is the symbiosis of fungi, right? And it could be either an algae, which is what type of organism again? Algae is classified as what? Plant, animal, bacteria. Protist, good. So it could be a fungi and a protist, which is the algae, or it could be a fungi and a cyanobacteria. And what color were cyanobacteria again?
Like bluish.
Bluish, because they contain what? Bluish green. So the main idea here is that the fungi live with these guys, or the fungi live with these guys because these have the ability to photosynthesize stuff. So then they can get sugars from that, partner. So that's why they live with them, right? So do you guys remember that when we talked about succession also, like lichen is like a pioneer species. It's very, very strong. It's very hardy. And it can grow on something where there's like minimal stuff there already. So this is often like the first thing to form after like an area has been totally wiped out of all its inhabitants. Lichen is often like the first pioneer species to arise there. So it's kind of cool. Okay. So these are the two I need, I want you to, know what, if I say what lichen is composed of what two organisms, if I say mycorrhizae is composed of what two organisms, you'd have to know that it's, which one it is, right? Okay, so diseases caused by fungi, and we're mainly going to talk about human diseases, but although like there are these like creepy fungi that like, and I'll show you at the end, that can like cause animals to like almost be mesmerized and do weird stuff. But anyway, so the diseases, human diseases caused by fungi, a lot of times, so they're classified, the way they're called mycoses, right? That's kind of similar to the word mycelium, right? Which is like that network of underground hyphae, right? So they're called mycoses, and there are 4 different levels of mycoses that you should know, and how fungal diseases are classified, right? So the first one, superficial, like just on the surface, like in the hair maybe, or just like on this very, very top surface of the skin. Not life-threatening, maybe unpleasant, but certainly not anything serious, right? Cutaneous is when it gets into that first layer of your skin, right? So it's not that bad, but again, it's a little more serious than just like a simple superficial mycosis. The next one is subcutaneous, which is now we're starting to get a little like deeper into like into the skin layers. So it's this is starting to get a little more dangerous, more painful, like and then the final, like the most severe type of mycosis is systemic or deep mycosis, right? Which is pretty much like it's affecting overall systems or organs, and it could result in like severe loss of function or even death. So if untreated or even if treated, so sometimes it can be really, really dangerous. Usually you hear of like, people being, dying from like bacteria or like viral diseases, but, mycoses can also cause a lot of suffering. So, and we'll just go through surfaces, skin or hair, superficial layers of the skin, nails or hair, subcutaneous is, in that connective or bone tissue, and this is like on the organ level, right? Sorry, I don't know why those animations are so out of order. But anyway, so those are the different levels, right? And so you'd have to like, on the quiz, you might have to like rate which level, you don't have to like diagnose. If I said like, ringworm, what level of, mycosis is that? You don't have to do that, but you have to know, that subcutaneous are not as severe as systemic, and, cutaneous are less severe than subcutaneous, right? Okay, so let's just go over some common fungal diseases. And again, these are more on like the superficial to the cutaneous level. They're not really that serious. But what they call them is tinea, right? They start with tinea, and tinea actually means a worm or a grub. I don't know if that's Latin. I think it might be Latin. So in the past, they, before they even knew what was causing these, these mycoses, they thought that it could have been a worm, and I think that's where the root of the name ringworm came, right? So so they're all called tinea, and then they talk about the body part that's being affected, right? So tinea capitis, does anyone know what that might be? Cap means head, right? So that is like a type of fungus that affects the scalp. I'm just going to warn you, some of these pictures are kind of disgusting. So so this is like a picture of tinea capitis, right? It's like a fungal infection that affects the scalp, right? But still not life-threatening, right? But just kind of gross. All right. Tinea corporis, all right? This is another word for ringworm, right? So, and ringworm can occur anywhere on your body, and it's marked by that like characteristic, ring-shaped sort of rash. I've never had ringworm, but I think that it's like probably a little itchy. It looks, it's very, clear what it is, right? So that's called tinea corporis. Corp is like usually the root for like body, right? And so then that can happen anywhere on your body. So ringworm, right? Okay. Tinea pedis, can you guess what this is?
Athlete's foot.
Yes, good. So it's on your feet, right? Like pedal, like pod is also usually the root for feet too. So yeah, I don't know if you guys, you don't have to volunteer that, but like some people might have had athlete's foot if you like sweat a lot in shoes and aren't wearing socks, or even if you are wearing socks and you're just like having a lot of moisture in your shoes that is not being dried off, then that's like a very, prime area for fungus to develop, right? And again, this isn't like life-threatening, but it, it's gross, right? Look at that like nice person spreading their toes for us. But yeah, it's like this, it like affects the first levels of the skin, right? All right. Tinea cruris, and this is like jock itch, right? I don't know, like that area also, I guess when you're, if you're like rubbing a lot and then you're sweating when you're playing sports and you're wearing like tight pants that aren't like letting your, leg area breathe, then, you can get, and I tried to like zoom out of the, the really graphic area. But again, this is like on someone's leg, kind of in that region, okay? So that can be also pretty uncomfortable. And then tinea barbae, does anyone know what barb might mean? Barb is a beard, right? So some people could get like, you see these like gross, like little like lesions or little, rash kind of like eruptions on the face around the beard area, right? Okay. And then I think there's one more. Oh, tinea unguium or onychomycosis, which is the nails, right? So I don't know if you guys have ever seen someone with like yellow toenails, but that again can be from, like my husband actually, this is really disgusting. My husband actually on his large toe, he plays like soccer a lot, and his toe actually kind of looks like this. And then at one point it actually looked black too. So I think, yeah, anyway, disgusting. But this is another type of mycosis that, or, fungal, tinea, they call it tinea unguium for your fingernails or your toenails. Okay. All right, and then the last one, and you guys can probably figure this one out. Sometimes people say manuum, like something that's manual.
Hand.
Exactly, good. So that, right? Ugh, I don't, I've never had that either. I can't really explain how that might feel, but you guys can probably tell, that wouldn't be very pleasant to have either. So anyway, all of these conditions caused by lovely little fungus friends, right? So fungus, obviously, great for the ecosystem, great for the environment. What else do? We eat them, right? So obviously, like they have a lot of really good properties, but they can, we're starting with like the bad things that they do, right? There are also like parasitic fungi, and this is like so, it's kind of scary. This really creeps me out, but like nematodes are like kind of primitive worms, right? But like if you look at this, here's like the nematode here, and then the fungus actually like is able to sort of like latch around the worm and then like feed off of it, right? So that's interesting because fungus are considered such like less, so more primitive than these, nematodes, but yet they still can prey on each other. I mean, on them, right? Or, like act as parasites to them, which is really, interesting that they've evolved that capacity. And have you guys ever heard of these zombie ants? Anyone? No? And this kind of goes along with like there's like a host of different like weird ways that like that have evolved, that organisms like can use each other to like in kind of like really sick ways. Have you guys heard of those like wasps that like lay their eggs in spiders, and then like they so they paralyze the spider, and then like the wasps like they lay their eggs there, and then like the babies, like as they're growing, they like feed on the paralyzed spider and like eat it alive. Have you heard of that? No? Anyway, it's like so like I don't know, like evil, and like I don't know, it's really interesting how nature works itself out. But this is kind of like one of those examples. So pretty much what happens, and I have a video on this, but do you see this poor little ant here, right? This is the ant's normal body, but then do you see this thing growing out of here? That's a fungus, right? The fungus is like way of spreading its spores. So let's just watch this real quick. because I think this is what I wanted to show you. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Will Gladstone. I'm 13 years old and live in Boston,
Yeah,
Massachusetts.
this is not what I was talking about. All right, here we go.
Fungi and slime molds race to decompose dead matter on the forest floor. Many spread by releasing spores, up to 30,000 a second. If just one of these spores lands in the right place and takes root, it can colonize a whole new area. But not all fungi feed on the dead. Days ago, a spore landed on this ant. Now she's acting strange. A network of roots has infiltrated her muscles. Her body has been taken over by cordyceps, a parasitic fungus. It floods her brain with chemicals, drugging her, compelling her to head where conditions are perfect. Just the right amount of light, just the right amount of humidity for the parasite growing inside. It forces her to clamp down in a death bite, and cordyceps reveals its gruesome nature. After 3 weeks of growth, cordyceps can release its own spores, infecting more ants, releasing more spores, infecting more ants, releasing more spores, infecting more ants, infecting more ants, more and more and more and. Cordyceps can wipe out entire ant colonies. But more than just ants are at risk. There are over 600 species of cordyceps spread across the world. Most are found in jungles, where they prey on a whole host of victims.
All right, so you guys get the picture, right? So basically, the fungi has the power to then like control the ant's body so that it goes up to like the highest part where this dispersal of the spores would be like the most effective. It makes the ant like bite down and then pretty much like die up there in this like area, and then the fungus like pretty much feeds on the ant and then creates its like reproductive stalk thing to spread all of its spores out onto the land, and it's really quite interesting, I think. Okay, so now let's talk about the good things of fungus. So obviously there are a lot of ways that humans can use fungus to their advantage, right? So antibiotics. What was the source of penicillin? Do you guys remember? Penicillin, remember?
Wasn't it like mold?
Exactly. It was like it came from the mold, penicillium or whatever. So yeah, so fungus naturally produce a lot of antibiotics. So that's like one huge application that we've been able to like harness to our advantage. Good. So antibiotics. Okay. Cooking, right? Obviously, we eat not only mushrooms. Okay, sorry. So in cooking, you guys know to make bread and to make alcoholic beverages, what do we need to use?
Yeast.
Exactly, right? So yeast helps bread rise. It helps make alcoholic beverages like beer and wine. So those are ways that we've been able to use it. Food, so like, have you guys do you know what this is?
Blue cheese.
Blue cheese, and that green stuff in there is pretty much what?
Fungus.
It's like fungus, right? And I know that sounds really gross, like for people who like blue cheese, but that's just what it is, and it makes people obviously it's edible and doesn't make people sick, and some people really like that taste, that like really cheesy taste of and that's made by fungus. And obviously mushrooms, and then like there's more recent like this is still like I read an article about this, but this is still kind of like not that widespread yet, but there are like in the search for like finding more sustainable biodegradable methods. I read that there are these like to go packages that are actually being made, and like utensils also that are being made out of fungus, right? So that's kind of cool. That's like a good, interesting sort of application in the future, potential. So yeah, and I think that's it. Is that all we have? Oh, and then medicinal mushrooms. I'm sure you guys have heard about that, right? Some people take them, as drugs, right? Like illegal drugs to hallucinate and like whatever. But they actually have medicinal properties too, like some like sort of like elixirs or like weird like kind of therapeutic like materials are made from mushrooms because they do have good properties to help like soothe certain ailments. So that's another application. I know in Korea, I remember I used to like when we would go to the mountain or something, I would see like all these older people like searching in the woods for mushrooms, for these like really expensive mushrooms, and I think they said that they had like these medicinal properties. So anyway, so that's like one other way of using mushrooms and fungus to help our lives. Does anyone have any questions? No? All right. So you kind of feel like you have a little more I'm gonna stop this. You feel like you understand. Oh, is my camera on? There we go. Okay. So you understand like the different kingdoms of eukaryotes now. We did prokaryotes, and now we did the three main kingdoms. The three, like kingdoms of eukaryotic kingdoms that could cause disease, right? And we're not going to do a disease project because I think that you guys, you wanted quizzes instead. So I think we're gonna have the quiz tomorrow, and then on Friday we'll start talking about plants, and then we'll talk about respiration and photosynthesis. And yeah, any other questions for today? And I will make sure to post this PowerPoint right now, and I'll make sure to press post so that you can look at it right away, and you have plenty of time to study for the quiz. All right? Yes? Okay. All right. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a good day.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.